your legacy doesn't have to be huge. Your legacy is what you've done in life, and there's someone around there who needs to see it. You don't have to do big things, but you can make a difference in life just by standing up and being who you are.
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis. This is a very special interview with my sister podcaster, Michelle Elizabeth Brown. I had an opportunity to sit down with her last year when she was in Atlanta for our LGBT Health Summit in August of 2019. And she shared with me how she got started with her podcast, which I will leave a link in the show notes so that you can enjoy her creativity. And she also talked about her life in Detroit, poetry, and the joy of being an older Black lesbian. I know you'll enjoy this episode.
My name is Michelle Elizabeth Brown, and I show up in the world as all three names. I am a Black queer woman who unapologetically accepts all of those and steps away from none of it. I'm a constant surprise to people, and I'm always learning, listening, collecting information, and sharing.
Well, Michelle Elizabeth Brown, it's wonderful to have you on the Zami Nobla podcast today. I love the three names, as I am Angela Denise Davis.
Yes.
So I know the importance of being able to have those three names and have people say it clearly. I am especially excited about having you on the podcast today because you are a sister podcaster. Mm-hmm. And in the world of the podsphere, it's very important that as Black lesbians, we know each other, get to share information with each other and resources, because it's important that we show up in the world, and especially in this digital landscape. So it's important to have you here as the podcast creator and host of Collections by Michelle Brown. Wonderful. So we're glad to have you here today. We do a mix of things here. We talk about the personal and the professional. So why don't we start by you just telling us a little bit about where you grew up and how important that city, that native city of yours is, even to you today?
Well, I was that little kid from the east side of Detroit. I am still from Detroit. I think that Detroit made me. What was interesting in growing up was I have, in fact, most of my friends they'll say well, where's your mom from? And they'll tell all this stuff. I would tell them, my mother's from Detroit. And someone said, well, where did you go for this? I said, we went up to the corner store. So I think that a lot of things form you. Being from Detroit, there's a rich Black history I've wanted to know about, and I've done it, but also being not of the South, it helped me want to learn about that. And then how do you mix the two cultures? Because Detroit is that place. If you talk about African American history, it's that place that when we escaped from slavery, we went through the Underground Railroad. Mm-hmm. During that Northern migration, we passed through Detroit looking for a better life. And it might be one of the older cities, but what happened in Detroit shapes this country. And it still remains a leader in movement, in social justice, in thought. Mm-hmm. And that's me.
Is there a large or an active Black LGBT community in Detroit?
Because we have an LGBTQ community, I would say that the lines of it is sort of ambiguous because we don't have a lot of places where we congregate. If you go to, there's, I think, 3 Black churches, okay, you might go there. We have a center, but everybody doesn't go there. We don't have one long, strong organization. So often we have Hotter Than July. That's where you just about see everybody. But often there can be people who are in the community who you don't know or who you see very rarely because there isn't a place where we all gather. And that can be good and bad.
Tell us a little bit about how you came to the world of podcasting and a little bit about your particular show, Collections by Michelle Brown, and what that means.
You know, because we sort of talked about it earlier, and I really got to thinking about it. I had started doing more public speaking, written my first book of poetry, and the person who I was working with got me on podcast. And I was like, oh, well, this is interesting. You know, it wasn't my big NPR moment. They didn't get me on Terry Gross, which I wanted, but they started to find ways to get me through different podcasts. And from that, I got to know more people and a different level of people who looked at my books, who weren't looking like that big bestseller or whatever, who shared my passion, who heard that. Then one of the people who I did was with a guy in Chicago who told me about another podcaster who was a woman. And they had a live call-in show, Can We Talk For Real? And for real? You know, that's how I called in once because they would ask, sometimes they'd have people, and they were talking politics, which is my other nerdy thing. And so I called in and we had a really great discussion. People called in, asked me questions, and someone told them, you know, you should have her on more often, or even as a third co-host, you know, because, you know, she brings something to it. So I started doing Can We Talk For Real? Did that for about 3 or 4 years. Took it from being local. We won awards. And then about 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, one of the two co-hosts had long time dropped off. The other one got married. I don't know what that has to do with it. What's love got to do with it? But then she was all into her marriage. I mad at her. And I said, I was talking to someone. I said, you know, how do I do this? Because I fell in love with the work, the storytelling, the talking to people, the connecting people. And they helped me do it. And my thought had been like connections. But she said, you know, these people who you're talking about, who you see, she said in her mind, she saw like jewels and she saw little blue Tiffany boxes. And it was a collection. So we became Collections by Michelle Brown.
Telling stories and helping people shape their own narrative is not new to you because you have a history in journalism and you've done a lot of writing. Tell us about that piece of your career, how you started doing journalism much earlier in your career.
I often tell people, like, I worked with the Boggs, great James and Grace Boggs, and Jimmy wrote prolifically, and Grace did also. And I would write. In fact, I had been not only the editor, but then the primary writer for a community newsletter called the Neighborhood Information Exchange, which is how Grace and I connected. And because she did one for So Sad. And we started to do a program called Detroit Summer in 1992, which has gone on to be more than I think any of us dreamed of it. Jimmy was dying, and he and I would often talk, because he was my elder, and I'd sit there at his feet, and he would tell me. And as he was dying, he said, you know, Michelle, you have a gift. You see the community, and you're able to tell the stories of the community, and we have to hold on to that. And he said, I want you to promise me you will write. So I went from a newsletter, and I just started to submitting things. I became a regular writer for Between the Lines, which is our LGBT paper. For Detroit News had a section on Detroit, where I went and often told stories of people in the neighborhood who were doing things that were really important. And then also it really encouraged telling their stories as they were. Sometimes people can't express totally their feelings. I can do it so much better through poetry. And so I would use that as a way when I would hear a community words, but hadn't taken a form. And so I would do that through poetry, and I would do it through telling stories and through some of these articles.
When did you start writing poetry?
I even wrote poetry as a little girl, but I think that I had many people, it wasn't something that I saw. But then, and I would say in part during Detroit summer, one of the things that we did was we talked about different ways of communicating. And young people then, some were rapping, some were doing poetry, and poetry has expanded, to it doesn't always have to rhyme. I can do things that rhyme. Sometimes you don't have to necessarily do haiku. You can do poetry in different ways, but part of what it is, poetry is about capturing feelings. I have a friend, Cesar, who does a workshop, and it's called Poetry Can Be Anything. And in working with local poets in the Detroit area, because we have a big poetry community, some gay, some straight. Sometimes we all come together around poetry. And in doing that, poetry can be anything. And how do you see that poetic in life and in under individuals in situations and the irony of it? So that's how I started doing it, writing, performed it, put it in a book.
You have 2 books.
Okay. The first book that I wrote, which I was really surprised came out, and I want to say 2008, was Wild Fruit Hidden in Open Spaces, Musings in Prose and Poetry. And the second one was 3 Layers in a Brassiere, and that came out, I want to say, in 16. And I'm putting together things now. And, after a while, I just get like an abundance of things, and I put it together. I think that in Wild Fruit was really honed about working a whole lot in community and building community around Detroit summer. And 3 Layers in the Brassiere, a lot of it talks about love. It came through a period of time when, thinking about love, looking at love, what was happening in the country. We got marriage equality, and how did people feel about that, and seeing people express love through that.
I love the titles of your books. How did you create those wonderful titles?
Wild Fruit. Every summer I would go to Maine, and we would do, with part of the box, it's called Conversations in Maine, but we would walk through, and we'd start the day, and usually end the day with a walk through. And sometimes you'd walk and you'd look down, and there would be like mushrooms, or you'd find cranberries and blueberries, and they were wild, and we'd take them back, and that day it'd be made into like a wonderful meal. Or maybe we had planned a meal, but here were these beautiful things that did it. And so that was wild. That's initial. And often in both books, I have like 2 poems based on wild fruit. So the first one was talking about, living off land and appreciating the environment and finding these things that can nourish us. And then the second poem called Wild Fruit dealt with like sometimes the people who are in our life who nourish us and do this for us are right there. They're hidden in open spaces. So then moving forward to 3 Layers in a Brassiere, I'd gone to Toronto with a friend of mine, and we were staying with an elder, and Gwen was like in her 90s, and everybody was fussing around Gwen, and Gwen was trying to tell them, I'm okay, but you need to hear me because it's getting close to time. And they didn't want to hear that. And we were going to go out, and it was kind of cold, and they were trying to go, and you have to wear a scarf. And she said, look, I've got 3 layers and a brassiere to keep me warm. But I'm listening. I heard what she was saying. So the first 3 Layers in a Brassiere poem talked about what she was trying to say. That I've gone through this, and that it's time. But then later on, when I thought about it, I thought of being a woman and how our lives can be like in 3 layers. And often what a brassiere does, a brassiere can show like going from being a girl to a woman, and maybe from a woman to being an older woman. And the things that you saw, I wrote one poem about 3 layers in a brassiere, but talked about being the girl and not having one, then getting one and the joy of being it, but then also what it opened up to. And then the third layer was here you were after all the kids are gone, and you're looking back at life. So. The next book, I haven't decided what I'm going to call it. It will just come to me. I mean, and really that's often how things just come to me. And usually I've already done this first poem and I'll be looking back over the work, see the first poem, something will hit me and say, oh, this is the name of a next book. And then I'll reflect on it and write the second poem. But I haven't hit that yet.
Well, you've been here in Atlanta for the Black LGBTQIA Public Health Forum that Zami Nobla co-sponsored with the Southern Unity Movement on Saturday. It was great having you here. And one of the things that I think just from being able to hang out with you this weekend and listening to your podcast and knowing that you're a journalist and a poet is something you just said is that gift of listening. And it seems as if we are not doing enough of that in our cities, in our neighborhoods, in our country to really get a sense of what people are saying. When you interview people and you are asking questions and you're listening, what are you hearing about the current state of our world today in our cities, particularly cities like Detroit, where there's a lot of gentrification, a lot of change and transition. What are you hearing as you're listening to the world today?
Well, and that's an important part because I also do public speaking and often it's around political things and listening to hearing people. I'm listening to hear their heart. I'm listening to hear what they've lost, what they hope for, how space has affected them. When I hear people who talk gentrification, when I hear someone talk about how they were walking down the street was in the city that they grew up in and they felt that they owned, and here were the other that took up the space on the sidewalk and how that felt, that not being heard in words and language, telling their stories, recognizing too that we had a story and that it might be lost and wanting to remind people of that. And also that sense that, what is that spark that's still there? That many people who are out there who I interview do not see themselves as down. We might not be in power, but we're not out. And what is that? What's that next step? What do they want to tell people? What do they want to make sure that doesn't get lost? But what is their passion? What is their fire? And also, what's their vulnerability? And being okay with talking about that vulnerability because there's a whole lot of other people feeling that way. And sometimes we just don't talk about that. And it's important to know that you're not alone.
Well, we would like to listen to you read some of your poetry now.
Okay.
If you would grace us with a poem.
I talked to an elder, someone who's providing housing and doing things about elders, particularly these are all of my guests are LGBTQIA2. I learned a 2. In Canada, we use 2 for two-spirited. So all of my guests are from our community or allies. I mean, they're really strong allies, not just Emma. And so I had talked to both of them. One was in New York, one's in D.C., and I also spoke to someone in Chicago who was talking about how we care for people, and a woman from Detroit who talked about being a lesbian and not having anyone, who's going to take care of them. So I wrote, who will know? Who will know? Who will know? Know that while I still walk, my pace has slowed a bit. I stop to smell the roses, watch the seasons change, that I arrive a little late, no longer painfully punctual, just a little late, with stories to tell of things I saw along the way. Who will know? The stories I tell again and again, listening patiently, giving me a loving nudge when I get stuck along the way. the words hanging on the tip of my tongue, reminding me of my memories when my words begin to fail? Who will know that I need a helping hand when my cozy clutter has become just a mess? Maybe looking a little disheveled or even unkempt, when my pride keeps me from saying, I can't, so I hide. Simply staying inside, living alone, being alone, because I'm alone. Who will know when time is running short? Help me savor every moment. Take one more walk in the sun and rain. Listen to my stories, helping fill in all the holes. Share another laugh, another dance, another hug, another tear. Who will know when I'm ready to cross over, to face that grand adventure, to face what's to come, to remind me my work is over, remind me that I have loved and am loved. Then, as we listen to music, just sit and hold my hand. Who will know? And so I wrote that and dedicated it to the first person who had this conversation with me, Dr. Wilhelmina Perry. And when she won an Esteem Award, at that award, I read that and dedicated it again to her and sent her a copy.
Oh, nice. Lovely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's been published in a couple of things. Of course, afterwards, my son called me and said, are you all right? I said, I'm okay. I'm okay, But it was something that I really felt. Mm-hmm. And not only talking to her, talking to Dr. Woody, talking to Jackie Boy, talking to Dr. Watson, I heard this.
Mm. Is that a question you ask yourself as well? Or is that just something you hear in the world as people?
It's a question that you hear in the world. Mm-hmm. It's a question that I ask because, you often hear we lose track of people, mm-hmm. And then you hear and you go like, when did that happen? Where have they been? I think that's why I try to stay in the world. And also through my podcast and having people tell that maybe someone will think about archiving histories, think about hearing someone else's stories, think about reaching out and touching someone and saying, hey, you okay? Mm-hmm. How are you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a very poignant question. And as I think about the work of Zami Noble, as we deal with Black lesbians 40 and over, and a real focus on providing affordable, sustainable mm-hmm. housing mm-hmm. to Black lesbian elders, that's a question that I could see people in our community asking themselves. Mm-hmm. Because so often within the aging process, we're not always connected mm-hmm. in community. Mm-hmm. And even sometimes when we're in community, that question or that sense of isolation can be present. Mm-hmm. You are someone who is very much in community and very busy and doing a lot of things on the landscape, with a very full bio of things that mm-hmm. you've done. How do we best engage people, especially our community, Black lesbians, 40 and over, and as we look at even more seasoned, older women, how do we help shape community so that people cannot feel isolated, even when they may be within community?
Mm-hmm. And, and I think that not only about engaging them in things, you talked about that listening. Mm-hmm. That's important. Often if I hear about someone or I see someone, you figured it out. I talk to people and I ask them something to bring them out and then to make that connection with someone. It's easy. Sometimes all someone needs is an ask. Mm. Hey, I'm going to this. Would you like to come? Or so-and-so likes movies. You should meet them. And I often introduce people. That's why I often say the show should have been called Connections, because I'll introduce people and I'll talk to them. And also to have someone think about their legacy. And your legacy doesn't have to be huge. Okay. Your legacy is what you've done in life. And there's someone around there who needs to see it. I, they often talk about Ruth Ellis, who died at 101. I was at the Ruth Ellis Center, and there was a young trans sister who was 25 who said, before coming up there, she just knew it was the name of the center. There are people who know those stories who need to tell her. And as she met those people who knew those stories, who, I said, oh, you need to talk to this and that. She said she got it. And that was the work that she needed to pass on. And then the other thing I say, you have to recognize what you've done and the impact you have. Because on the flip side, I introduced Jim Toy, who is he is 89, and he lives in Ann Arbor, and they wanted to name a center after him. And he said, oh, they should name it after people who are more important, who are doing things. And I told him the story about the young woman at Ruth Ellis. I said, somewhere out here, there's a young Jim Toy who you can say, you don't have to do big things, but you can make a difference in life just by standing up and being who you are. And so it's about making those connections, sending someone over there to talk to it. Someone has something, and they did that. Even this weekend, I had talked to Walter Nagel, we had talked about was he going to continue to preserve the legacy of Bayard Rustin. And he said, to develop the next group of young activists. And one of the panelists talked about how she worked with young people, and she was trying to get them to read Martin Luther King and stuff to develop it. Here is Bayard Rustin. How important, if you want to develop that next generation of angelic troublemakers, to show them someone who here it was from our community. And so to make that connection, to say, hey, you need to know them. And they need to know you. And then you need to reach out and grab a kid and keep our community alive and going and growing and building upon our history. We're not done yet.
That's right. For those who don't know Ruth Ellis, tell us a little bit about her story.
Well, Ruth Ellis, Ruth Ellis lived in Detroit. And at a time when, we lived in the closet at her house, she would host parties. She was out and about. And she was full of joy and life. She lived to be 101. We did a women's coffee house. She loved to dance. She danced with my mother. She was in a wheelchair. My mother danced with her. And she told my mother, she said, if I'd met you back in the day, I might have chased you. And my mother said, you know what? I might not have run. And I'm going, but Ruth had a joy of life. And she remained in part of the community and worked through her life to help keep that sense of community at a time before we had centers and all of this. There was Ruth's house. She and her partner lived out and openly, so it ain't brand new, folks. If you go back and you look, there's a brilliant video that chronicled her life and showed about how she and her partner lived together as open lesbians. They had a business. That's what builds the foundation. We need to know that. You have some people think like it's all brand new. It ain't brand new. Ruth was doing it back in the day and lived to be 101 and was cared for by community who made sure she got to things, that she could still dance, that she could still laugh and show joy. I had, it was like I had a girlfriend. Didn't last. But anyhow, we were at the coffee house and she said, Ruth flirted with me. I'm going what do you want me to do? You should be happy. You should be happy. Like I'm going, hey, Ruth, what you doing talking to my girl? Yeah. But, I said, girl, you need to be happy about that. That was a clear signal that wasn't meant to be, But Ruth was just a joy. And those of us who got the opportunity to know her and to meet her, to me, that gave me hey, I'm living to be 100 and I'm going to be dancing through life.
An incredible story. She is very much a landmark of Detroit. And there's some people who are so committed to their cities and their neighborhoods that if they were not present in that way and made such a great legacy, something would have been lost.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about people who've been committed to cities. Do you always see yourself being in Detroit?
No. My guests from my show come from across the country, and some are international.
Mm-hmm.
I have been in different spaces throughout because I'm also an activist, and I have been engaged in social justice work across the country. So I've been many places. I think that what I can do anywhere. Will Detroit always be home? Detroit will always be home. But it's about community. It's about where you see things happen. I love what the internet has allowed you to be able to do. I was in Cartagena and was able to get online and find out what was going here. In fact, I think I did an interview. I was in Cartagena and I did an interview with someone up here to talk about social justice issues. I think it's important.
And where's Cartagena?
Oh, it's in Colombia, in South America. So it's important that you're able to travel, to go and to see, and also to get that perspective, because it is important that we, as Black LGBTQ community, we're catching it here, but we have to connect with what's happening to our sisters and brothers across the diaspora. So if you don't know what's happening to the oppression that's happening to our brothers and sisters in Africa, and other countries, we don't all move forward. It's not okay to be okay here, and they're still getting killed. That's it.
So some of our sisters are not as connected digitally in that way. And even with the podcast, there are a lot of people who tell me, well, how do I access it? How do I listen to a podcast? What is it? And certainly Black lesbians aren't alone in that. We know that the listenership of podcasts is rather low. So there's an opportunity to engage more people in listening to podcasts, and everyone's talking about that, trying to get more listenership. But because you brought up that digital piece, and I think that's so important because we're connected in that way, how do we encourage other people in our community to plug in, particularly older lesbians who may be a little wary of connecting to the computers and the internet, and it may be a new thing for them. But I think that's so important for people to plug in digitally, because at some point, I think if we're not there with that technology, we're going to be left behind.
Well, one of the things, and I recognize it, so, you can have groups and organizations. I've also find links with those groups and organizations so that I have had people or organization have like a listening party at somebody's house. And so to think about that, and when I talk to someone, find out what they're involved or what organizations would be interested in that. So sometimes that means that the link goes out to these groups on Facebook. I also send them out sometimes to people who I know are engaged in this work. The woman who did in Chicago, who does a thing on aging. We connect a lot of her podcast, my podcast, to her podcast, to groups in Chicago, to groups about aging. And then I sent her the link, and because I break my show up into like 3 segments. So she had, like when they had support groups, they did one segment and then they talked about it. So she played it there in a way that some people who aren't, but here she had this recording that she could do. So we have to find ways to, and hopefully everyone will get, but in the meantime, how do you get the information, get these interviews to people who then can take it and do it? I've also transcribed some of mine, made them into articles so that then they were published in different places. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But if I'm not doing that and not getting it out, I can have a wonderful interview with you with something that's really critical that I feel the community needs to know. But if I don't find a way to do that, then that doesn't happen. And I talk to, it's really important to find out what are these other avenues to reach people.
You've been doing your podcast collections for the past 3 years. I'm just curious to know, what are some of the things that you've come to learn about the experience of podcasting and connecting with people in that way?
Well, I knew it was going to be work. Okay. I know that I have also found that one of the things that I can give to people is to help them realize that to create their narrative. It's your narrative, not just, resume lighting. What is your narrative? Who are you? What are you about? What do you want to say? What I've learned is what an amazing community we are. Everywhere from elders to I interviewed through someone else, a young Black muralist who started in New York doing graffiti, got a scholarship, went on, the only PE class was equestrian arts, became a Black cowboy, and is now, again, muraling and doing community murals in Seattle. I mean, it's a Black queer guy, and he's just phenomenal. Things that people are doing, but he had some really clear things of what he saw. So I've heard vulnerability everywhere from millennials to elders, concerns and things where it cross path. So, I mean, we are just an amazing, phenomenal community, and we need to claim that.
Would you read another poem for us?
Okay. Since Zami Nobla deals with our lesbian community.
Yes.
So from 3 Layers in the Brazier, I did one section that was all about love.
Oh, beautiful.
I mean,
wonderful.
Break up, keep up, everything. So, but this one, it's one piece, but it's in different segments. So it's called Love. Thinking of you. Temperature rising, heart beating, pulse racing, fearful, hopeful, wanting to open the windows, wanting to throw open the door, throw it wide open, inviting, welcoming, wanting you to come in. Woke up this morning with you on my mind. The gentleness of your touch, the softness of your skin, the promise of things to come. Wanting to show you photos of my family, tell you ancestral stories of hidden secrets and loves. Wanting to pick things up, spruce things up, moving this, rearranging that, changing the sheets on the bed, fluffing the cushions on the couch, seeing you sitting here, laying there, not knowing when, but knowing soon, 'cause I woke up this morning with you on my mind. She likes to make me smile, says it's her job. It is. She likes to read my words, gave me a shiny red pen with my name on it. It was for no special occasion, just so I could write and think of her. I do. She calls me every night to hear about my day, listening, laughing, encouraging, her sweet, soulful voice tucking me in. Good night. She tells me with her words, shows me with her actions, whispers with her kisses that she's my only one. She is. Phone sex. Thinking about your call last night, this morning, my hand was still there, right there. Thinking of that place where your words had taken me, taken my mind, my heart, my body. Moaning, sighing, breathing, touching, you know where, right there. Only one regret. I didn't go to sleep in your arms and awaken to your smile, 'cause it was only phone sex.
Woo! That third section caught me off guard.
And that's the thing that's so funny is because I have had people who hear me do like a rousing political speech.
Yes.
Or see me write something like that. And then I'll go in and break it in and they'll go like, whoa, girl. I said, but you know what? Because I am still woman. I am still a woman who loves women and who feels that. So don't get it twisted. I didn't put that on the shelf. It's still there.
We can still talk about love and all of that stuff, even when we're in our 50s and 60s, Michelle.
Hey, I've met couples who are even older, and it's like, I said, hey, I'm with you, because that's how I'm going. That's how I'm going.
What is and that's a perfect segue, because of what I was going to ask you after you read that poem was, what is the joy of being an older Black lesbian in a relationship with someone you love and living together and moving through this world in love?
Well, the joy is, I think, I love me. Okay, that's important. I love me. And because I love me, there were things that used to, I wonder, I'm able to see the beauty in her. And I'm not looking for her to complete me. We complement each other. And that we can love each other and understand things because we've gone through some things. We've gone through some things, but there's still, what was it? Saturday, someone said, how do you describe aging? And I would say one word, alive. I'm still alive. And I'm going through life with someone who recognizes that I'm still alive. And being part of live, it's a transitional thing. It changes. What was alive today, being alive, is singing in the kitchen, singing ukulele, singing, going on a road trip and singing Motown, as opposed to, it might not be being in a club twerking, okay? But I'm alive, and she knows that, and she too is alive. And this is just another chapter. It's just another chapter.
That's one of the things that I've always loved about Ruth Ellis, is that she loved to dance, and she never stopped dancing. I think sometimes some of us, as we age, we think we need to stop, quote unquote, dancing or doing the things that make us feel alive because we're older and it may not be as becoming. Even just the whole idea of talking about love and making love and enjoying that, but being able to be clear about what it means to be alive and embracing that. That's a very beautiful thing.
It really is, Girl, I took a belly dancing class not long ago. I'm gonna get my dance on.
All right.
But and I think that the other thing too is, like, we appreciate things, and like, why not dance? Okay, I might not be able to do like I said, I don't twerk. I barely hustle. But but hey, I got some moves. And when the music hits and I like it, I'm going to get out there and do something, because it feels good. Dancing, to me, is part of our DNA.
Yes.
And why would you stop?
Yes.
Why would you stop at any age? I think that Ruth danced. I mean, I've seen a lot of other elders who get out there and dance. I love to see people dance, either by themselves. I love to see a couple dance. You're supposed to.
One of the questions I ask, particularly as I get near the end of my conversation with guests, is there anything we left out? Is there anything you want to say to a listening audience of older Black lesbians who have taken the time to sit in on this conversation with us?
Well, Saturday, I was talking to someone and they said, and I said how good it felt to be out. And they said, well, yeah, but sometimes if you're out, that makes you going to get pigeonholed. And I said, well, be out, be who you are. I have had things where people, and I know they've looked at their, who are our speaker list? Well, we don't have a Black lesbian. And I know that that's what they're looking for. They want you to come and don't be a Black lesbian poet. This is a slot they're going to put you in. But we, and this is a line that I use from my show, that I talk about people living between the lines, standing boldly in the crosshairs of their intersectionality and creating change. as Black lesbians, we have been here. We are that. We are standing boldly in the crosshairs of our intersectionality. Be out, live out. And when they call you, if they want to put you in that box, just kick the sides down. Stand up boldly and talk about this life that we have lived and we continue to live in the crosshairs of that intersectionality and create some damn change.
Ooh, I love it. Michelle Elizabeth Brown, journalist, poet, public speaker, podcaster, connector. What's your legacy?
My legacy, in fact, I had a guest, which is interesting. He was a millennial, and he talked about it. And one of the things that I remember, we were raised Catholic. My mother gave up her non-Catholic beliefs, but she always sang this song. And when I was talking to Derek, who's 30, he talked about this song. And it was and I don't even know the whole song, but I do remember his part. He said, if I have touched someone along the way, then my life has not been in vain. And I have had moments where someone has come and reminded me when I didn't even know that I had touched them along the way. I was at a thing with Vice President Biden, and I was waiting to go in to talk to him. And one of the young Secret Service guys said, you probably don't even remember me. You probably didn't even see me. He said, but I saw you, and you were out, and you were walking, and you were talking, and you were at an event where there were other LGBT people, and you were all proud. He said, but you were in the minority, but you stood up there and you spoke. And he said, and then I knew I could live my dreams. And I was like, and no, I couldn't have picked him out in the lineup. I didn't know who he was, but you don't know who you've touched. And so I don't need to know. Do I have awards? Yeah, I've got awards, they're collecting dust, mean more work. But to know that somehow, somewhere out there is a little Michelle or Michael who, through what I've done, will continue this work, continue our struggle, continue our march to be more human. That's it.
What's the best way people can plug into your podcast?
Okay. Well, I have a Facebook page, of course, Collections by Michelle Brown. And no, it is not clothing. Trust me, that was it. So it's Collections by Michelle Brown Blog Radio. You can use the same thing, go on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Blog Talk Radio. My show comes out every Thursday at 7 p.m. And it is archived on all those platforms. So if you've missed one, and I like SoundCloud a lot, you can go back and listen to one of now close to 150 interviews that I've done. Mm-hmm. You can go back and listen to them. You can email me if you have an idea about a show at collectionsbymichellebrown@gmail.com, or simpler, IamMyChange@gmail.com. You can leave me a message on Facebook. I will get back to you. And always looking to hear new stories. Think about it. And I could guarantee you that I'll get to you immediately. But hey, I do this every week. So I'm going to get to you sooner or later. So,
Michelle Elizabeth Brown, thank you for connecting with us. And thanks for being part of our Black lesbian herstory.
Oh, thank you.
Michelle, that last poem was a hot one. I hope you all enjoyed that and that you'll check out Michelle's podcast, Collections by Michelle Brown. I know how hard it is to do the work that it takes to create a podcast, so support the sister She has some really great guests. I love what she's doing. And hey, I was a guest on her podcast. I'll put a link to that one. Maybe that's a great place for you to start. But she has incredible guests and she does incredible work. So support this sister and support other sisters you see who are moving around and creating space for older Black lesbians to do work and to center our lives as we make it through these uncertain times. As always, I so appreciate you listening to the podcast. And my heart is with you. So have a sweet one.